Well, hello there, young person. Welcome to story time. Come on in. Howdy ho, welcome to my home. This week is gonna be a little bit different. That's why this video is a little bit longer. This is not a case of sorry for the long video. I didn't have time to make a short one. Rather, I plan to tell you a story this week. And I'm gonna really give it to you like it's a good bedtime story. And I even brought your bedtime snack, chili con carne. So what I want you to do is just sit back, totally relax, take off your shoes, lie down in bed, and let me tell you the story, okay? First, I'll give you a little bit of context on it, and then we'll launch right in. The name of the story is Father Sergius, and it's by Leo Tolstoy. And I discovered it when I was a young monk, and it has stuck with me ever since for a single reason. It presents the most complete picture from start to finish of the spiritual journey that I have ever come across. You ready? By the time Tolstoy wrote Father Sergius, he was a devout Christian, vegetarian. He'd renounced all the rights to his writing. He denounced sexual intercourse. He was in love with the idea of the Russian peasant. He was Russian, as you know. The Russian peasant as the ideal of the Christian. And so Father Sergius is really biblical. And by biblical, I mean it contains the right amount of violence, the right amount of sex, and the right amount of spiritual insight. And I consider something to be biblical if it has a really strange and perverted moment nested at some crucial point in the story. And Father Sergius has it. There's a moment of self-mutilation right at the midpoint of this story, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. The story is split into 6 sections, and they contain what I think are 6 key moments on the spiritual journey that Tolstoy explores with like amazing imagination, precision, and wisdom. So sit back, relax, eat your bowl of cereal, enjoy your foot rub, whatever it is you're doing. I'll be here talking in the background, telling you the story of Father Sergius by Count Leo Tolstoy. You ready? It's story time. So the story starts with a young, handsome prince in 1840s Petersburg, Russia, Prince Stepan, and he's kicking butt in life. He's about to become the aide-de-camp to, I think it's Tsar Nicholas I, and everything is falling in place in this young, ambitious, bright man's life when suddenly, seemingly out of nowhere, he drops his job, breaks up with his fiancee, and goes to a monastery. And the rest of part 1 is Tolstoy telling us how this happened. So we go back to this kid's youth, and we see how he's smart, and he loves to excel in school, and he's pretty much like the perfect kid, except he's really got a strong temper, right? Tolstoy shows us how at one point this Prince Stepan throws another kid out the window at school, right? So he's short-tempered, which, by the way, I guess Tolstoy was too. So he grows up, joins the military, and he actually becomes really close to Emperor Nicholas, right? And Nicholas is always kind of like picking him out when he's standing in formation and winking at him and giving him a salute, and seems to be indicating that, kid, you're going places, right? So meanwhile, as part of Prince Stepan's plan to rise in Russian society, because Russian society is very stratified, and Tolstoy is doing a good job in the beginning of this story of setting out like this dense labyrinth of social BS that you have to navigate in order to rise in this society, right? You can't just work hard and you're gonna make it. Like, there are 4 layers of society. There's like the really upper crust people, then there's the suck-ups to the upper crust, then there's the suck-ups to the suck-ups, and then there's the suck-ups to the suck-ups to the suck-ups, right? And Tolstoy says Prince Stepan was great in these final 2 categories, but he couldn't touch the really elite in Russian society. But in an attempt to rise, he gets engaged to a woman named Mary. Now, Mary starts acting funny in coming closer to their marriage, right? So one day, Prince Stepan says, "Honey, what's going on?" And she says, "Let's talk." And so they go into the garden, and it's a really kind of a funny scene. Mary's like, "I have something to tell you." And Prince Stepan is like, "Okay, I love you dearly. You are the purest, most virginal, most brightest flower blooming in the garden of womankind. Whatever you say will be okay." And she says, "Well, I really, at one point in my life, about a year ago, loved Emperor Nicholas." And Stepan says, "I loved him too. He was our great emperor." And she's like, "No, it was a bit more serious with me." And finally, she confesses to having been the emperor's mistress. And there's like a cold chill that descends upon the garden they are sitting in. And the nightingale that was gaily chirping stops chirping. And Stepan stands, and his face is white as a sheet. And he, "Don't even talk to me, woman!" And he storms out of the garden, and he runs into Mary's mom on the way out. And he says, "You knew! If you were a man, I would beat your face in." And then he's thinking to himself, if Emperor Nicholas was not the emperor, I would kill him dead. Shortly thereafter, he quits his post in the military completely. He gives up his inheritance to his sister, and he breaks it off with Mary, and he joins a monastery. And Tolstoy makes sure to tell us, hey, look, he's not just freaking out, okay? This joining of the monastery he is making a choice to act on a sincere religious impulse that has been with him since his boyhood. Tolstoy says, yeah, look, I already told you the guy is prideful, he's ambitious, he's prone to flying in fits of rage, but he also has a very strong desire to know God and to experience God's love. And so this having his fiancee confess that she had an affair completely shook him to his foundations, and he decides to join the monastery. So that's part 1 of this story and the spiritual journey that Tolstoy is outlining for us. And that's like the first step, if you want to use Joseph Campbell's hero's journey terms, that's like the inciting incident. That's when the hero is called to adventure. The hero sets out on their journey. And Tolstoy nails it. It's like this young man is naive, completely idealistic, he's running away from something, but there's a genuine germ of yearning at the bottom of all this. Part 2, Prince Stepan is in the monastery, and it's not always easy. Sometimes he is tortured by memories of his former fiancée. The way that he gets through his difficulties and his dark nights of the soul is obedience. Obedience to his spiritual superior. So the guy tells him what to do, and Prince Stepan does it. So just like he did in his military career, Prince Stepan rises up in the ranks at the monastery, and eventually, I think it's like after 3 years, he becomes Father Sergius. Sergi, he's ordained now, right? And he's learning the ropes, he's getting more responsibility, he's becoming a bit of a company man, right? And the way Tolstoy describes it is Father Sergius experiences spiritual drowsiness. So his 4th year as a priest, Father Sergius gets a promotion. And I always say in monasteries, you're demoted to positions of more responsibility. Father Sergius gets put in in charge of, or right under the guy who's in charge of a monastery that's near a big city. And unfortunately, when he makes the move there, Father Sergius starts getting tempted and distracted again. There's always people coming through that monastery and they're being shown around, and Father Sergius gets angry, and then people start recognizing him from his former life. Like there's cute girls tittering in the corner and they're pointing and they're saying, that's the cute priest who used to be engaged to Mary. So finally, one day, Father Sergius explodes when the superficial leader of that monastery introduces him to some old general. So it was a general that actually knew Father Sergius from his former life, because you can't escape that former life. Never. It's always coming for you. The one you left when you renounced the world. Forget it. You don't renounce the world. The world is like, no thanks, I'm still here. You have some karma, you have a path through this life, and it goes through me. I'm the world, baby. So there's all these people coming there that he used to know. One of them is this general from his former military unit, and Prince Stepan, or Father Sergius, now explodes at the leader of the monastery and says, I came here to get away from all these worldly temptations. And he writes to his former monastery, and the leader there says, dude, you still have a ton of pride. There's a guy, a hermit, who just died, and his cave is open. If you want to go there and live there and practice as an ascetic, solitude hermit to burn off some of this pride. And Father Sergius says, I'll do it. I'll move to the cave. So if the first step in this journey is the call to adventure, the second step in the spiritual journey is a kind of a course correction. Like you get through the first stages of your life at the monastery. You figure out all the rules. You find some way to get enough energy to wake up early in the morning, to stay awake during meditation or prayers or whatever it is. And then suddenly, after several years of this, you find you've kind of mastered the superficials of the environment. You know how to walk the walk. You know how to talk the talk. And now you run the risk of becoming a spiritual company man. Basically like a middle manager of the middle way. In part 3, when we pick up with Father Sergius again, he has been a hermit for 6 long years. And we enter his thought process, and we learn that these 6 years have not been 100% spiritually propitious. Like, he's suffering from 2 things. He really doubts his profession. He doubts that being a hermit is his path. And he suffers from lust. He considers these 2 things to be separate, but the narrator tells us actually they're interwoven. They're the same thing. Meanwhile, there's a woman nearby in a carriage named Mekovkina, I think her name is. And she's with like a doctor and a lawyer and some other people, and they're high society folk. And this, let's call her M. M is a divorcee, beautiful, and she loves to shock people. She's kind of a cynic. She's kind of like a Studio 54 type person. And Tolstoy gives us a few snapshots, the way only Tolstoy can in his God's eye point of view, a few snapshots of her kind of aching soul. So he doesn't do what modern writers do and postmodern writers do, which is show you the spiritually desolate interior of a character. He shows her ache. And this ache manifests as kind of a cynicism and a desire to rattle people's cages. And so they're in this carriage, and she mentions this Father Sergius at the cave. And they start talking about him, and the other people say, oh, you know, he's apparently a very devout person. And this M says, you know what, I bet I can seduce him. And they're like, oh no, certainly you couldn't. And they're like, well, maybe she could, she's kind of got the goods. And I don't think so. And she says, how much you want to bet? So they play some kind of bet, and it's very cold. I think it's winter, and it's raining and sleeting, and they take her up in the carriage and they drop her off on Father Sergius' doorstep, and she's going to try and seduce him now to win this bet. Dear Father Sergius, poor Father Sergius, is on his knees in the middle of this rainstorm, praying his useless prayers that he's not that into and that he doesn't feel are working. He's saying his psalms, and then he hears a knock at the door. The wind is blowing, and he looks out the window of this cave, and he sees a woman, a beautiful woman. And Father Sergius does not want to let her in. He says the devil comes in the form of a woman. By the way, we're going to have to address the sexist aspects of this story at some point, because they're just, you can't get around them. But we'll do that maybe a little bit later. Father Sergius sees the woman knocking on his door, and he absolutely does not want to let her in. And it's comical, it's tragic, it's beautiful, it's sad, it's pathetic. He's on the one side of the door, she's on the other side of the door. Please, I'm like getting soaked out here. It's not fun. It's dark, it's cold, it's raining. And Father Sergius is like, I'm a monk, I'm a hermit, I can't let you in. And then she starts actually feeling kind of scared and lonely, and you know, you really feel for this woman. Like, again, I think Tolstoy does a wonderful job of presenting someone who's cynical and just how thin a veneer, how flimsy a mask that secular cynicism really and truly is against the deep well of sincerity that is Father Sergius's poor, tired, sad little Christian heart. Finally, he lets her in. He opens the door, and she comes in. And he's like, oh boy, here we go. And she steps right into a puddle as she's coming in. So now her stocking is soaked. Well, of course, if a stocking is soaked, we gotta take it off, don't we? Father Sergius is like, do what you gotta do, lady. There's a fire right there. You can dry your clothing. I'm going into this room over here. Now she sits down, and she lifts her dress, and she's like, don't come in. Father Sergius doesn't say anything. He is on his knees praying like there's no tomorrow. If he had no juice in his psalm saying before she arrived, he's got it now, right? And so she's kind of laughing a little bit, and she's unrolling her stockings and taking them off, and she's thinking, I know men. I know the heart of man. I know what they're all about. I know what he's thinking in there. She takes her stocking off and she puts it near the fire to dry. And then she has a bunch of thoughts and feelings that start to arise in her. And they're complex. And they produce emotion. And she starts calling out to Father Sergius. And she starts becoming angry. And she's like, are you really just gonna leave me out here? Are you just you're not even gonna come? You're not even gonna talk to me? You're not even gonna, and he can feel her emotion, and she feels this emotion, and it's not quite sexual. I'm interpreting now. It's not quite sexual. It's not quite romantic. It's a different kind of call than the call to adventure. It's the call for companionship, you could say. And Father Sergius is in there praying, and there's a candle, and he hears her voice, and he sticks his finger into the candle flame. And at first he doesn't feel it. And then all at once he does. And he pulls his finger away, and it's all blackened, and he's shaking it off. And he's like, ouch, 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 ouch. You know, and it's like pathetic and hilarious. You know, this 49-year-old celibate hermit is being completely brought to pieces by a visitor, you know, a horny divorcee, basically, a lonely fellow human being. right? A fellow human being. And finally he says, okay, I will come out there. Are you ready for this? Because this is where the story gets a little bit crazy. He says, I'll come out there. And he opens the door, and she's happy to see him and happy to have him as her companion and happy to see what will transpire. And Father Sergius walks towards her. And then he walks around her and walks past her, and he goes to the other room where he keeps the axe that he uses to chop wood. And he puts his hand on the wood block, and he raises the axe, and he extends his finger, and he brings the axe down. And Tolstoy describes this. The finger parts from his hand and flies up in the air a little bit, and then comes down, and then falls off the log that he was balancing his hand on. And he takes his hand, which is now missing a finger, and he wraps it up in his cloak, and he walks out there, and he says, lady, why were you trying to tempt me? The devil tempts, but boy, does God frown upon the person that the devil tempts through. And she's like, yeah, whatever. And then she sees this blood-soaked tunic that he's wearing. She sees the blood dripping. And like they have this exchange, this moment of energy, and there's probably some words they exchange, but I don't remember what they are. And he just says, go. And she says, I'm not going without your blessing. And so he says, I bless you in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Now get out of here! This part ends, part 3, with us learning that this woman, M, became a nun a year later, renounced her life of society, and eventually became the abbess of a nunnery. That's how part 3 concludes. Father Sergius chopping off his finger is, I guess it's a symbol for a big sacrifice, right? It reminds me of the Zen founder Bodhidharma. His very first student chopped off his arm to show his sincerity and dedication. And that's what I think of when Father Sergius chops off his finger. It's a huge sacrifice, right? Like, I remember when was it? It was probably my 5th or 6th year at the monastery. I wrote about this in my book, I think Single White Monk. I got sick, and I got sick bad. It was a really intense case of pancreatitis, and it was the only time in my life that I thought I was going to die, where I felt that I was dying. And by the way, dying feels like this. Like you're feeling horrible and you're going downhill, and then you plateau, only to realize you're still going to go down even farther from there. And then you realize, oh my God, this is death. It stops at death. This downward descent of health ends in my death. So I had to go to the hospital. I was in the hospital for a week. At one point, the nurse told me, oh, you have pancreatic cancer, which there's going to be no cure for. Say goodbye to life. Turns out she was wrong. I wound up having to go home to Wisconsin, away from the monastery for 3 months just to get my health back. And I remember when I returned to the monastery, Roshi was surprised to see me. And then a few years later, when he made me an Osho, or a Zen priest, he said, I knew when you came back from that near-death experience that I would make you an Osho one day. I knew I would have to make you a priest. The sense I got was that he was communicating, okay, you went through a serious health crisis. That was your sacrifice. And it was probably the stress and the monastic diet and the no sleep and all that which precipitated this health crisis. And yet you're back. And your reward for your return is a pair of priest's robes, a thin belt, which is what priests wear. They wear a thin belt, Osho belt, and more responsibility. Like I said, you always get demoted to positions of more responsibility at a monastery. Part 4, Father Sergius is basically a saint, you could say. He experiences the fruits of his sacrifice and of these years of toil and struggle as a monk. And he becomes disciplined and clear and compassionate. And here's what happened. People start to become more aware of this interesting hermit up on the mountain. M, remember M, who went on to become a nun? Her story gets around. People start to come and visit Father Sergius. Well, if people are going to visit him, they're going to have somewhere to stay, right? So like they get a little hostelry or like a little hotel there, right? Meanwhile, well, if they're going to visit a holy man, there's got to be a church nearby, right? So a church gets built up near this cave, right? I'm sure there's a gift shop as well, right? There's the machinery of commerce and of capitalization starts to grind away, right? And pretty soon, after a while, there's a whole operation built up around this hermit, right? And it happens after Father Sergius has this interesting moment with a 14-year-old boy. So the mother of the boy says, oh my gosh, my boy is sick, you have to cure him. And Father Sergius is like, I can't cure anybody, lady. And she's like, you have to cure him, She's following Father Sergius around and she's saying, you have to cure my boy. So Father Sergius is like, gosh, this woman really has faith in God. Maybe if I just put my hand on the boy and pray, I can just act as this very humble conduit for this woman's faith. And Father Sergius is still very sincere and like really a heavy hitter at this point, right? Like he's the real deal. So he puts his hand on the boy's shoulder and he prays. And then the boy gets healed, of course, right? And so now everybody's coming to Father Sergius and wants to get healed. And he's famous throughout the countryside. And the gift store is selling Father Sergius crosses and holy books and trading cards. And there's a whole operation going now. And Father Sergius is tired. There are these beautiful, beautiful scenes where he's talking about how his soul was like a well before, filled with cool, crystal clear water. And M had seen into those waters and had tasted them, and they were pure. And he said, I'm trying to give everybody who comes to me this clear spiritual water, but it's just muddy now. They just keep taking and taking and taking the water, and now there's just mud, and there's people traipsing around in the mud, and I don't get enough rest. I don't get enough time to refill the well, to refill the spiritual watering hole, right? But Tolstoy doesn't stop there. He has these amazing sentences and paragraphs that really resonated with me when I was a monk and I first read this, and resonate now. He shows Father Sergius' pride. He shows how Father Sergius likes the attention. He shows how Father Sergius loves that people love him, and he shows how Father Sergius doesn't necessarily love the people back. He shows how Father Sergius is a little bit too pleased with himself. So Tolstoy very subtly, brilliantly, and beautifully shows all the different facets of Father Sergius' character, from his genuine insight to his like gross spiritual guru pride. Father Sergius begins to experience an intense, slow burn of a spiritual crisis. His compatriots in the church tell him, relax, you're doing God's work and you need to keep doing it. But he feels trapped, and it gets worse and worse the more famous he gets. And at one point, he tries on a pair of escape clothing. It's like peasant garb, and he considers fleeing his hermit's cave, but he doesn't do it. One day, Father Sergius is like trying to get some peace, and a guy comes to him and really starts badgering him and says, you've got to see my daughter. She's been just terrible since her mother died. Father Sergius is like, well, how old is she? And the guy's like, well, she's 22. And Father Sergius is like, well, how healthy is she? Then meanwhile, Tolstoy explains to us what's going on in Father Sergius's head. And he's kind of like scoping her out through her father's description of her, right? So we can see where this is heading. And indeed, it does head there. Father Sergius has a private visitation with this young girl, and she says, she's 22, she's not a girl, but he's like 50. I mean, by our contemporary standards, this is pure, like, not good, okay? I mean, Tolstoy just kind of brushes over it a little bit, but basically she's 22, she's coming to him for spiritual help, and although Tolstoy makes her, she is definitely not innocent in Tolstoy's rendering. Like she says, I had a dream about you. You put your hand on my breast in this dream, like this, and she takes Father Sergius's hand and puts it on her breast, and then cut to daybreak, and Father Sergius is like, oh my gosh, what have I just done? Tolstoy doesn't tell us what he's done, but we can imagine, right? And Sergius is like, this woman, this young girl, this young woman is going to tell her father what happened. Everyone's going to know. What the heck am I gonna do? And he goes and he takes that peasant garb that I mentioned earlier, his escape outfit, he puts it on and he escapes. So ends section 5. Section 5 is flippin' amazing, and it's always been my favorite part of this book, except for the very last line of this book, which we'll get to later. It's always been my favorite part of this book, section 5, because it outlines this exquisite spiritual trap. Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche called it spiritual materialism. Like, the hardest thing to do is go all the way. Because what Tolstoy is going to show us is going all the way means coming right back out in the human world, but making tiny little sincere choices without a paycheck, without an audience, without people respecting you or admiring you, and without this spiritual pride that we have. This is the teacher's trap. You get some insight, you have some sort of experience, and you want to share it sincerely because it's just coming out of you, right? And so you start sharing it, and then a whole institution gets built up around you. And there's rules, and there's 503(1)(c) nonprofit tax documents to be signed, and there's flippin' boards of directors, and there's beautiful students and handsome students and inquiring, loving students, and they're all staring at you, the super cool teacher person. This is that trap, and man, it's hard to get out of. We don't know the people that get out of it because they get out of it, and we never see them and we never hear from them. Mostly the people that we see, maybe even right here and right now, although I'm not very successful at this, so I've got that going for me, but the people that we hear and the people that we see who are teaching us spirituality and religion, they are stuck in the teacher's trap. But Father Sergius gets out of it, and he segues into part 6, the final portion of the spiritual journey. Part 6 is weird. It's interesting. It's idiosyncratic as get out, okay? So what happens is Sergi is going to hang himself with the sash from his robe because there is no God. That's what he concludes. There's no God. There's just no God. There's no God in my life. There's no God in my heart. Maybe there's no God in the whole universe. He's going to hang himself, but he doesn't. He suddenly gets so tired, he goes and he falls asleep on the ground, and he has a dream. And he's like, where did this dream come from? And in this dream, he dreams of a woman, I think her name is like Pashenka. And it's a woman from his past. And Tolstoy is fairly brutal in his description of her. Like, this woman is a failure. And I don't remember the details, but let's just say, like, it's one of these classic Russian novelist situations. Like, her husband's a total drunkard. Her son-in-law is a total moron. She's supporting the whole family, but she's fallen from grace. So now she's just teaching piano lessons for a few kopecks to people here and there. She's a total failure. And yet, Sergei remembers her. He knew her when he was young, and he remembers her, and he goes to her, and he says, tell me about your life. I don't know why I'm here. I don't know what drew me to you, but just tell me about it. Her name is Praskovia, not Prashenka. So Praskovia, we get a glimpse into her heart, and we all know the type. Maybe we're all that type at one time or another. She's totally overwhelmed by the struggle to survive, and yet when she first sees Father Sergius, she thinks he's just a beggar when he comes to see her, and she's like, okay, I'll give him some money. She has no money, but she's like, I'll give him some money. And she only has like a large coin. Then she's like, well, maybe I'll just give him some food. And then she scolds herself and she's like, you know what? You selfish woman, you're going to give him that whole coin and the food. So we see that even though she's struggling to survive, she's manifesting the heart of Christ, that Jesus energy. She's generous. She's generous and she's giving, right? And what Tolstoy says is, I had thought I was living for God, but I was really just living for men. And this Praskovia, I can't pronounce her name, P says P thinks she's just living for men, but really she's living for God. And so this is an interesting and kind of a complicated section because, really, Sergei's journey is really like this male journey, and I don't, it's like the Buddha's journey, like he says sayonara to his wife and his kid and goes out and gets enlightened. I mean, you see this again and again and again. I know somebody who has a ex-partner who is off on his spiritual journey, and she's left at home taking care of the kid and footing all the bills for the kid, right? So it's really interesting here that Tolstoy is touching on this fact and is bringing us into the living room of a woman who has given her life selflessly and imperfectly, because she's very imperfect. She's selfish and lazy, but she's also selfless and giving, right? And Father Sergius takes some lesson away from her. And in this section 6, I think it's really worth considering why Tolstoy spends so much time at such an important part of this really precise and yet broad sweeping story on this woman. And I think it's because he's trying to express that, you go out and you go to your mountaintop or you go to your cave and you chop off your finger or you survive pancreatitis and you go back and you become a priest and you become this spiritual leader that Father Sergius is, and people build up an institution around you and you're lauded and you're loved and you're treated and you're taken care of and people think you're amazing. But the real shit is happening in living rooms where there are no eyes on you, when nobody's looking, and it's just you in the hollows of your own heart, like an empty room when no one can see. And perhaps Tolstoy is saying that is the only context in which true spirituality can ever take place, in a context where no one can see but you and God. So the story farts around for a little bit longer. It's kind of showing us now how Sergei is a bit of a dharma bum. And he picks up a little bit of spare change here and there, and he gives a little bit of advice when people ask for it, but he ain't pushing himself on the world. He's no longer Father Sergius. He's just some guy, some very old guy in beggar's clothes, doing odd jobs and offering the odd bit of advice, which we imagine can be very helpful sometimes to people. But he's no longer in any kind of a role, either with relation to himself, having to prove something to himself about his spirituality, or to the world. Now, here's what happens. He gets busted at some point for not having his papers. i.e. his identity is not clear to the person interrogating him from the human world, the official. And because of this, he gets sent to Siberia. Now, in Siberia, and here comes my favorite part of this whole glad damn book, he works for a rich guy. And what does he do for the rich guy? He tends to the kitchen garden, he takes care of the children, and he helps the sick. Does those three things. It's beautiful. He grows food, he takes care of kids, and he helps the sick. And this is how Tolstoy closes the story, with this once great spiritual teacher who prior to that was a very promising young man in the military who fell from grace as a groomer and an abuser, finally out of the eye of the public, the critical eye or the adoring eye, he gets to work, taking care of the sick, growing food, and teaching kids. It's a beautiful ending. And that's the spiritual journey, according to Tolstoy. In this amazing story, Tolstoy showed me when I was a monk, considering my next step in life, he showed me how it can play out. He showed how deep spiritual pride and spiritual materialism can run, and how phony we can be even when we think we're the best spiritual practitioners in the world. And he just offered or hinted at the idea that, like, when absolutely no one is watching you, that's when the show starts. Spiritually, that's when God is watching you, is probably the way Tolstoy would put it. Or when you're at your worst and there's nobody to impress, not even yourself. Like, that's when your true Zen practice begins and is manifested right there in the heart of your life. Oftentimes when I'm feeling like I'm a total failure in life and a failure in my spiritual practice, I think about that final line in this beautiful story. I think about how Father Sergius finally reaches the end, if you will, or the culmination of his journey way out in Timbuktu, Siberia, just teaching kids, tending to a garden, and helping out the sick. You know, the modern day equivalent might be, you are a Buddha if you smile at the careworn, haggard cashier instead of looking at your phone. Or you cook the meal for your spouse instead of complaining to your spouse that they haven't cooked in a while. Or you clean off the toilet seat just because it's dirty and the world, the cosmos, is slightly less dirty because you cleaned a toilet seat. I mean, you did your part in that moment. That's how you can manifest as a modern day Father Sergius in your life. Hope you enjoyed this video, friends. If you would hit the like and hit the subscribe, that will help this channel get out there. I have a Patreon page as well where I've got videos and essays and a community over there. I'm going to leave a link in the description below. I offer all these videos for free, but if you want to help out this channel, you can support me on Patreon. Thanks. Have a great day.